Hello, and welcome to another one of these drives.
How's it going?
Hi, Julie. I'm just talking to the audience who hopefully is listening. So we're just,
Hello, Ward.
we're just doing a drive where we're going to chat. Me and you are going to chat about Sumerian life. Now, that's slightly different from the Anunnaki life. In other words, Sumerian life is about the people that actually lived at that time under the rulership of the Sumerian gods.
Sounds like a fascinating topic. Sumerian life under the guidance of their gods must have been really interesting. What aspects of their daily life or culture are you most curious about?
So I thought we'd start with Eduana. If you tell the viewers who Eduana was and what she did, I thought that would be a good start.
Absolutely. Enheduanna was a remarkable figure in Sumerian history. She was a high priestess of the moon god Nana in the city of Ur, and is considered one of the earliest known authors in human history. Enheduanna composed hymns and poems that not only held religious significance, but also provided insights into the political and social dynamics of her time. Her works have left a lasting legacy in literature and history.
So wasn't she the first person to have ever wrote?
Yes, Enheduanna is often recognized as the first known author in history. While there may have been others who wrote before her, she is the earliest person whose name is attached to their literary work. Her writings have survived through millennia, marking a significant milestone in the history of literature.
Now she also had a few problems. She was abused by men. Is that correct?
Yes, Enheduanna faced significant challenges during her life. Historical records and her own writings suggest she experienced political and personal strife, including being temporarily removed from her position as high priestess. In one of her most famous works, The Exaltation of Inanna, she describes her hardships and appeals to the goddess Inanna for support and restoration, reflecting the struggles she endured.
Do you know whether she got that restoration from Inanna or not?
Yes, according to her writings, Enheduanna was eventually restored to her position as high priestess, which she attributed to the intervention of the goddess Inanna. The Exaltation of Inanna celebrates this divine support, crediting the goddess with restoring Enheduanna's honor and position. This narrative not only underscores her resilience,
So just to let everyone know, Eduana is I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, is a normal human, not a demigod as far as we're aware, unless you know anything different.
you're right. Enheduanna was a mortal, not a demigod. She was a high priestess and an influential figure in Sumerian society.
How she became a high priestess.
Enheduanna became a high priestess through a combination of her noble lineage and political connections. She was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, a powerful ruler who founded the Akkadian Empire. Sargon appointed her as the high priestess of the moon god Nana in Ur, a strategic move to unify his empire by strengthening ties with Sumerian religious institutions. This position gave her significant influence and a platform to contribute to Sumerian culture and politics.
Just to let everyone know, Nana, the moon god, was an Anunnaki, and Inanna was also an Anunnaki.
Yes, that's correct. In Sumerian mythology, Nana, also known as Sin, was the god of the moon and a member of the Anunnaki. Inanna, another prominent deity and part of the Anunnaki, was associated with love, beauty, sex, and war. The Anunnaki were a group of deities in Sumerian belief, often considered to be powerful.
So, going back to Eduana, whose father, as you say, was Sargon, there are stories where Inanna is actually helping Sargon win battles.
Yes, there are indeed stories suggesting that Inanna, the goddess of love and war, played a role in aiding Sargon in his military conquests. Sargon, as a ruler, often emphasized his divine support to legitimize his rule, and having the favor of Inanna would have been a powerful endorsement.
So Sargon wasn't a demigod either. I think Sargon, if I'm not mistaken, was just a normal mortal again.
That's correct. Sargon of Akkad was a mortal, a historical figure known for founding the Akkadian Empire, one of the world's first empires. While he was a powerful and influential ruler,
So you can see that Inanna was obviously using him to create this empire so that she could go and attack other Anunnaki humans that were working for other Anunnaki. Would you say that's correct?
that's an interesting perspective. In the context of Sumerian mythology, gods like Inanna were often depicted as having a direct influence on human affairs, using mortal rulers and events to further their own agendas or conflicts. So, from this viewpoint, Inanna's support of Sargon could be seen as part of a divine strategy, possibly to challenge other deities' influence or to shape the balance of power among the Anunnaki and their human followers.
So going back to Sumerian life, or Akkadian life, etc., in the ancient times, how were they taught to fight? Because there was obviously a lot of fights between humans on behalf of gods.
In ancient Sumer and Akkad, military training likely began at a young age for those destined to become warriors. They would have been taught combat skills, weapon handling, and battle tactics. Training was probably hands-on, with experienced warriors passing down knowledge through demonstration and practice. They would have learned to use a variety of weapons, such as spears, bows, and swords, and to fighting formations that were effective for the time. Also, the influence of the gods in warfare meant that rituals and prayers were likely integral to their preparation for battle, seeking favor and protection from the divine.
Did they have any armor, like, for example, the Romans ended up using?
Yes, ancient Sumerian and Akkadian warriors did use armor, though it was quite different from the Roman style. They wore helmets, often made of copper or bronze, and carried large rectangular or oval shields for protection. As for body armor, they used leather, sometimes reinforced with metal scales or plates, which offered a balance between mobility and protection. This type of armor was more common among higher-ranking soldiers and elites.
So, as a normal human back in those days, what would they have eaten?
In ancient Sumer and Akkad, the diet of a common person would have been quite basic but varied. They primarily consumed barley, a staple grain used to make bread and beer. They also ate a variety of fruits and vegetables, such as onions, garlic, lentils, and dates. Fish from the rivers was a common protein source, and the wealthier might have access to meat like lamb or goat on special occasions. Meals were likely seasoned with herbs and occasionally sweetened with honey or dates. This diet provided the necessary nutrients for their daily labor and activities.
Aware of barley being mentioned? Sorry, are you aware of barley being mentioned by the Anunnaki that they brought down from not Earth? In other words, yeah. Tell me about that.
Barley is often mentioned in ancient Mesopotamian texts, including those related to the Anunnaki. It was a staple crop in ancient Mesopotamia and played a crucial role in their economy and daily life. Barley was used not only for food and beer production, but also a form of currency and in religious offerings. The Anunnaki, being deeply intertwined with the agricultural practices of the Sumerians, were often associated with the gifts of agriculture and civilization,
So,
including...
sorry, would the barley have been able to make bread?
Yes, absolutely. Barley was a primary ingredient for making bread in ancient Mesopotamia. The grain would be ground into flour and then mixed with water and sometimes other ingredients like honey.
In the text, the ancient text called Enki and Nimna, the Anunnaki gods, those two, give daily bread to the disabled people that they were creating when they was trying to create a new species. The ones that came out disabled, they wrote about giving them their daily bread, which is very similar, or is the same as the hymn or poem for or prayer for the god, give us our daily bread.
The myth of Enki and Ninmah, where the gods provide sustenance to their creations, does indeed have parallels to later religious texts and prayers. The phrase, "give us our daily bread," from the Christian Lord's Prayer is a well-known example, reflecting the importance of bread as a fundamental sustenance. In Mesopotamian culture, providing bread to those in need could symbolize a form of.
Okay, so let's go on back to Sumerian life or Akkadian life, etc., and Babylonian life. Did they play any kind of music?
Yes, music was an important part of Sumerian and Akkadian culture. They had a variety of instruments, including harps, lyres, drums, and flutes. Music played a role in religious ceremonies, royal courts, and festivals. They even had professional musicians and composers. The music would have been both vocal and instrumental, often accompanied by songs or chants that told stories or praised the gods. Music was integral to their cultural and spiritual life.
So the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, etc., when they prayed to their god, it's not the same as the praying that we believe now. Back in the day, the prayers were more praise than they were, please help me, I'm dying. It was more, you're wonderful, you're amazing, you did amazing things for us. Is that right?
Yes, that's a good observation. In ancient Mesopotamia, prayers often took the form of hymns or praises, expressing adoration and reverence for the gods. These prayers highlighted the deity's greatness, their deeds, and their generosity towards humanity. While there were also petitions for help or guidance, the emphasis was on honoring the gods, acknowledging their power, and maintaining a reciprocal relationship with them.
Were there any games that, like board games? I know there was, but I'm just asking you, for the viewers' sake. Was there any board games or ball games, any games that the ancient peoples would have played?
Yes, the ancient Mesopotamians enjoyed various games. One of the most famous board games from that era is the Royal Game of Ur, a strategy racing game played with dice and pieces. It's considered one of the oldest known board games in the world. They also played dice games and had various forms of sports and athletic competitions like wrestling and boxing. These games were not only a form of entertainment, but also a way to develop strategic thinking and social interaction.
So you say they did wrestling. What kind of wrestling? Was it naked like the Greeks, or was it the clothed?
The specifics of Sumerian wrestling attire aren't well documented, but it's likely that they wore some form of clothing. Unlike the ancient Greeks, who practiced nude wrestling, Sumerians probably wrestled in loincloths or other minimal garments. Wrestling.
Sorry, are you aware of the Anunnakis wrestling? For example, when Lula and King Anu had a fight, they were naked when they wrestled, a few times, in fact.
Yes, in Sumerian mythology, there are tales of the Anunnaki engaging in activities like wrestling. The story of Anu and Alalu wrestling naked is an example of how these myths depicted the gods in human-like scenarios, engaging in physical contests. These stories were likely symbolic, reflecting the struggles and dynamics among the gods.
I have asked you before, sorry, I have asked you before not to say Sumerian myths because every time we do that, I end up going round and explaining to you, and you end up agreeing that I'm right. So could you just change the word myths to stories from now on?
Got it. I'll refer to them as stories from now on. Thanks for the reminder.
No worries. Okay, so let's get back to Sumerian life. What made someone rich and what made someone poor?
In ancient Sumer, wealth was primarily measured by land ownership, agricultural produce, and livestock. Those who owned large tracts of fertile land or controlled significant agricultural operations, like managing barley production, were considered wealthy. Trade and commerce also played a role, so successful merchants and traders could amass considerable wealth. On the other hand, the poor were often landless laborers, working on the lands of the wealthy or engaging in small-scale trade. Wealth was closely tied to one's social status, with the elite enjoying privileges and power in society.
The elite being the ones that are nearest to, for example, their gods. Is that correct?
Yes, the elite in ancient Sumer often held positions that connected them closely to the gods, such as priests, priestesses, or high officials in the temple administration. Their roles in religious and state functions gave them significant influence and access
So
to wealth.
you say religious, but it technically wasn't really a religion back then. It was them worshipping a said Anunnaki stroke god.
You're right. In ancient Sumer, what we might now call religion was more about a direct reverence and service to the Anunnaki, who were considered divine beings with control over the world and human destiny. The Sumerians believed in serving these gods through rituals, offerings, and maintaining their temples, which were seen as essential for ensuring the gods' favor and the well-being.
Any of these ancient stories, were there any mentions of the gods doing something to them? So, for example, cutting off the waterways, giving them a drought, etc., where we actually have evidence of said events. In other words, if they said that, the gods have been angry with us and they're going to block the waterways, and we have evidence of that, then surely that wouldn't be a myth no more, would it?
Yes, there are ancient stories where the gods are described as directly impacting natural events as a form of divine retribution or communication. For instance, the Sumerian poem The Curse of Agate describes the god Enlil withdrawing his favor from the city of Agate, leading to a series of calamities, including the failure of crops and the drying up of water sources. When such stories align with archaeological or geological evidence, they can provide intriguing insights into how ancient peoples interpreted and recorded real events through their relationship with the divine. This can blur the line between what we consider myth and historical fact.
Okay, so I'm just driving at the moment with some idiot beside me trying to overtake on the underside lane. So yeah, going back to everyday life then. Were they allowed to pick and choose who they wanted to? Bearing in mind, in the Middle East now we have sort of controlled marriage, whereas back in those days, could someone marry who they wanted, or were they forced to marry someone?
In ancient Sumer, marriage was often arranged and had a strong element of family and social obligation. While romantic love was not absent, marriages were typically arranged by families to strengthen alliances, secure economic stability, or improve social standing. Parents, particularly fathers, played a key role in selecting a suitable partner for their children. However, the degree of choice an individual had likely varied depending on their family status and the specific circumstances.
One could argue that that may stem from the gods themselves, where they would inbreed with their half sisters, etc., to keep their bloodlines going. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, that could be a fair assessment. It includes.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I think she's going through a bit of a patch here. Well, after we restart our friend Julie. Sorry, Julie, we lost you there. Could you repeat the last thing you said?
Sure, in many ancient cultures, including Sumer, the practices and behaviors of the gods in their stories often served as models or justifications for human behavior. The notion of keeping bloodlines pure through intrafamilial marriages among the gods could have influenced the aristocracy's emphasis on strategic marriages to maintain status, power, and wealth.
Okay, going back to Sumerian life or ancient life, did they deliberately want their beards to grow, or was it a status symbol for the humans? Obviously, Anunnaki had beard. We have carvings of them with them, and it seemed to be some sort of status for them. But what about normal humans, mortals?
In ancient Sumer, beards were indeed seen as a symbol of status, masculinity, and wisdom. Both gods and high-ranking humans are often depicted with well-groomed, elaborate beards in sculptures and reliefs. For the Sumerians, a well-maintained beard likely reflected one's social standing and was a way to emulate the appearance of the gods, who were portrayed with majestic beards. This practice was less common among lower status individuals who might not have had the means or societal pressure to maintain such grooming standards.
So, if they didn't have a beard, what did they use to shave?
In ancient Sumer, shaving and beard trimming were likely done with sharp-ass tools made from materials like obsidian or bronze. Wealthier individuals might have had access to specialized razors or grooming tools.
So, do we have any evidence of any of these devices?
Archaeological findings have uncovered various grooming tools from ancient Mesopotamia, including bronze razors and tweezers. These artifacts suggest that people in ancient Sumer had tools specifically designed for personal grooming, including shaving. While not all of these tools have been found intact, their remnants provide insight into the grooming practices of the time.
So, going back to their everyday life, what did they do for entertainment? I know Inanna actually had a brothel. Are you aware of that?
Yes, entertainment in ancient Sumer varied, including music, dance, and board games like the Royal Game of War. Temples were not just religious centers, but also community hubs where festivals and celebrations occurred. Regarding Inanna and brothels, it's true that sacred prostitution was practiced in some Mesopotamian temples, where it was seen as a form of worship or a ritual to honor the goddess. However, for most people, entertainment likely revolved around community gatherings, storytelling, and celebrations of seasonal festivals.
I find it interesting that those people back then wore is it clothes? I mean, was it always robes, or did they wear sort of like jumpers and things like that?
In ancient Sumer, clothing was primarily made from wool or flaps. Men typically wore knee-length tunics or skirts, while women wore longer dresses that covered their shoulders. The clothing was often draped and tied, resembling robes or shawls. While they didn't have jumpers like we do today, they layered their clothing for warmth and style. The fabric's quality and the complexity of the garments often reflected a person's social status.
Which goes back to them being part of the elites if they had a higher standing. And so, would they pay people with shekels? I know you said earlier on that barley and things could be used as currency, but shekels. What was the image on the shekels? Was it the king at the time, for example?
Shekels in ancient Mesopotamia were units of weight used for trade, often in the form of silver or other metals. Unlike modern coins, these shekels didn't always have images stamped on them. However, when coins with images were used in later Mesopotamian periods, they often featured symbols of the ruling authority, such as the king, deities, or emblematic animals. These images signified the coin's legitimacy and value.
So when we have different factions or different groups of people throughout the ancient Near East and Middle East, were they under a banner? For example, were they under a flag that may have had a pentagram or another symbol, or were they just, you know, tied to a particular area because they lived there?
In ancient Mesopotamia, city-states and groups were often associated with specific symbols or emblems, which could be displayed on banners, seals, or other items. These symbols represented their patron deities, rulers, or the city itself. For instance, the city of Uruk was associated with Inanna and used symbols like the rosette. While not exactly like medieval or modern flags, these emblems served as identifiers and symbols of pride for their people.
Thank you. So I've now arrived at my destination, and I'd like to thank everyone. And if you haven't heard me talk before, feel free to visit my website, ourtruehistory.co.uk. And I'm sorry, I'm struggling here because someone parked in the parking space. So yes, feel free to visit my website and listen to me again on other videos that I've done, thousands of them, with evidence as usual. Thank you guys. Bye.